you should build your business for consumers and not for investors.
I've spoken to someone who was, had been kicked out of his family home in Philadelphia, actually surviving on, just stuff from the government and, food stamps and things like that, but still was paying for Evolve. Even for a founding team to actually say something like, I'm going to build for the LGBT community, no one does that. We've been really courageous and bold in that step. It's narrowed our focus, but it's also attracted a lot of allies for our own mission, right? So for example, Google and Apple being absolute allies because of the mission that we're on. Whether it's ACT grants. I mean, I do get hate mails. I've got like emails, saying like you're doing the work of the devil and you deserve death. One of the things I kept hearing from VCs in the US last year was that mental health actually never had a breakout from a VC perspective. Even some of the companies that eventually went public have then gone bankrupt. Yeah, money might not pour into mental health.
Welcome to the India Opportunity Podcast. Our guest today is Anshul, co-founder of Evolve, the world's most inclusive mental health platform. They have over 1 million users globally. Evolve was awarded by Google as the best app for personal growth and featured as one of the top 4 mental health apps for World Mental Health Day in 2023. They take an inclusive approach to mental health in building for vulnerable segments and are currently the largest app globally in terms of users from the LGBTQ community. What makes this one super special is that Anshul is an old friend from college. We both studied at the University of Warwick together and had an entrepreneurial bug even back then. After Warwick, Anshul went on to work at Shell in the UK, but ultimately decided to move back to India to pursue his entrepreneurial dream. I'm really looking forward to doing a deep dive with Anshul today on the mental health space. We deep dive into various aspects, such as what's happening in the space currently, his experience of building for the LGBTQ community, and learnings from building a consumer tech business. There's so much to learn from this conversation, and I hope you enjoy watching. Hey, Anshul, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, Shrishti. Good to be speaking with you today.
Likewise, I cannot start anywhere else but our time at university together, given we were in the same batch in college. I remember even back then in college, you had an entrepreneurial bent of mine, and we were both involved with Warwick entrepreneurs during different years because of that inclination. Let's start from there. When and how do you think you developed an interest in entrepreneurship and business?
Yeah, firstly, thanks for bringing up Warwick again.
Yeah.
It seems a lifetime away. It's now more than 10 years, but always good to be connecting again with people from the same batch. I know we did spend quite a bit of time in Warwick together as well. Especially preparing for the exams and all of that.
All the walks back to Lakeside from the library.
Yes, exactly, and was at University House.
Yeah.
I think, Warwick was a very interesting place. I thought, that was a big stepping stone in the way I looked at life and I looked at the world. So, from being in a very sheltered upbringing in India to, suddenly being absolutely out there with people from all over the world. And I think diversity, even in terms of, the kind of backgrounds people came from. So I remember at Warwick, there were so many people from our batch itself who came from, really large family businesses, industrial families. And suddenly it was a lot of exposure on, there's a world out there beyond, just jobs. And personally, I come from a family where for generations, my parents, my grandparents, their parents have all been working. So working for whether it's large companies and MNCs, whatever it is, but they've kind of been in a service oriented career. And I think Warwick just opened my eyes. I always knew I wanted to be entrepreneur. I always knew I need to be that first person in my family to actually break the trend of just working for a company and at least giving myself a chance. And I think just being at Warwick, with a lot of, again, people with an entrepreneurial mindset really helped change that. Of course, it doesn't mean that you have to jump into entrepreneurship immediately, but eventually I did find that path.
Yeah, very interesting, right? Because I remember setting up Warwick Entrepreneurs with Victor and Andre in the first year
Yeah.
of college. And, it was such a great learning ground because even for me, I think that's where the entrepreneurial seeds were really sown. We were interacting with such successful entrepreneurs, bringing them to campus, hosting the talks and doing pitch competitions, all of that,
Yeah.
right? So that really brought out a very different side of me. And I think that's where, tech and interest in tech and startups just kept kept on growing from there on. What was it that gave you that entrepreneurial drive? Because I know you went to work at Shell after that. So what was that entrepreneurial bug that bit you? Was it a specific turning point in college?
So I think one of the memories I have in college was, I don't know whether it was Warwick Entrepreneurs or it was another thing, but there was this competition. I think McKinsey was sponsoring it that year, which was, it was a
Oh, I
competition, and
remember that. It was
a
Be
lot
Your
of
Own Boss.
be your own boss. Yes.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, that's correct.
yeah.
Yeah, and we had, I remember me and Karan and Leon and a couple of others. We put together this pitch on, I think it was something related to what today we see as a bucket as climate tech, but it was actually putting, a lot of solar panels for last mile connectivity for mobile network. So it was, getting inspired by how Haiti had rebuilt their infrastructure post the earthquake, back in 2012, and using the same technology for last mile connectivity in India and other developing countries. I remember we put that together, and I think we were the finalists and all that. So I think I had those moments where, anyway, the entrepreneurial bugs would, get me, and I would spend late nights and, just all the energy I had. Um, I think from a practical standpoint, we were all fighting for visas and to stay back in the
Yeah.
UK. So it meant that, I had to settle for a job. And yeah, Shell was a great company. They were one of the few that were actually sponsoring visas that year. Fortunate enough to get into the finance grad scheme, the year we graduated. So that was the obvious path. Um, and then after doing I did two roles in Shell, spent 3.5 years there. Um, was fast tracked for leadership. So, it was all really going well from a corporate standpoint. But I think somewhere I got the chance to really turn inwards and reflect. And I just realized that, that was setting me up for a path where, let's say in 10 years, I would kind of maybe be VP level and stuff like that. And just looking ahead, I realized that's not actually going to make me, very satisfied. So it wasn't, even at that point, it wasn't an entrepreneurial bug, so to speak. It was just saying that that's not the path, I wanted. So just packed my bags, moved back to India. Um, and I knew at that stage, I still lacked a lot of the hard operational skill sets and execution skill sets you need to, actually run a startup. And again, this is like, something that a lot of people are very naive about, saying that, oh, I have an idea, and, that idea is worth everything. So what I intentionally tried to do when I moved back to India was join an early stage startup, which I felt could, be a good, um, I would say, a learning ground for me to, learn some of these executional skill sets. And I joined an early stage startup where it was, less than 10 employees, really great team at that point, and they were building something, something in recruitment technology. It was called Shortlist. So joined them, got to learn a lot from, everyone I was working with there. And so right from, helping, working directly with the CEO on their pre-seed fundraise to then eventually, getting my hands dirty with tech and product and data and yeah, just, multiple things. I think that was a great point. Um, Even at that point, I think, the plan was always that, yes, I want to test myself out at some point. But I think for me, the real sort of inflection point was when, a couple of things happened and I realized that, what I'm really passionate about mental health. And I think with entrepreneurship, passion is something that's so important because, it is at least a 5 to 10 year journey. So, you can't have a fleeting thought and suddenly jump into it. You need to really be passionate about it enough that, it drives that resilience needed to actually, build a successful story and business at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And, because entrepreneurship, as you rightly said, I actually have started saying that it's not even a 5, 10 year journey. It's something that it is your life's work ultimately, right? And some people work on the same things for 20, 30 years, even,
Yes.
because the journeys are just so long. But I think, in our generation, there's also so much talk about the hustle culture where, you're supposed to condense timelines to, make a thing successful within
Mhm.
5 years, and there's so much pressure all around. But going back to your Shell days, because that must have been a very different switch, right? Going from first thinking of a climate tech idea in Warwick,
Yeah.
going to work in Shell, which is an oil and gas company, then coming back to work at a recruitment tech company. By the way, Shortlist was also a part of the Meta Accelerator, and they were
Oh,
part of the
nice.
cohort when I ran the accelerator back at Meta. So, very different industries as such, right? So what were some of the things that led you to mental health after that? Because you had experience across different industries and verticals, so you could have chosen to work in anything.
Yeah, I think just taking a step back. So while it does sound very different, moving from let's say Shell to Shortlist, and it was. So just to put some numbers out there, I remember my first role at Shell. We were a team of four of us managing a capex budget of more than $1 billion, right, with a B, and I had the authority to sign off on expenses and things like that worth over $20 million. So that was my the kind of permissions that I had. And then, from there going to an early stage startup where, you have to actually justify your salary because, if you're not able to actually take the company a little forward, and I see it now as well, in our own company, everything needs to have an ROI. Um, when I left Shell, I think there was this really interesting introspection exercise I did, which was looking back on, the 3.5 years I was at Shell and just trying to pick out the moments which gave me a lot of joy and happiness looking back. And I realized that the common threads that, those moments had were creating new things. So whether it was new processes, new tools internally, um, helping people grow. So I remember in my first role at Shell, we had a lot of folks. Our team was in Scotland, but we had a lot of folks in the back office in India, Manila, and a lot of my really proud moments were, nurturing some of that talent and helping them grow, upskilling them. Um, yeah, and so it was like really learning, I mean, creating new things, helping people, and also just upskilling myself. So those are the three things I realized that I value the most, right? And then it didn't matter which environment that's in, as long as I was getting that, I knew I was going to be fulfilled. So shortlist was, ticked all those three boxes as well. um, when I moved back to India, so I was working at Shortlist, a couple of things happened where one of the founders of Shortlist was actually certified by Google to administer this coaching program called Search Inside Yourself. So that combined a lot of mindfulness, neuroscience, and self awareness. And it was this program developed by some really great minds inside Google. And so we had a chance to actually do that as a company. And I remember that those 2 days were really, really amazing for me because it was probably the first time, you talk about the hustle culture. I mean, we grew up in a rat race. It is toxic. Even at Warwick, it was all about, the jobs we're getting or the master's program we're getting into. You never stop to actually reflect and think back. So those 2 days were great in terms of, really take like almost hitting the pause button and beginning to realize, how your emotions work, how your mind works. And that kind of initially got me interested in the mind to begin with. And then, I got very inspired by that workshop, and then I started facilitating workshops of my own. So after
Tell
about
us a little bit more about that workshop. It sounds very intriguing.
um, so so like I said, it was really starting to understand how the brain works to begin with. So how your neural pathways work, things like that. A lot of mindfulness, so a lot of really interesting techniques. So his name is Matt, the founder of Shortlist, and he combined a lot of really interesting knowledge he had learned from folks like Tony Robbins and Wim Hof and this Google program as well. So there's a lot of really cool mindfulness techniques, breathing techniques. A lot of journaling, a lot of just understanding, how to, like really simple hacks to, hack your energy levels, your mind, your mindset. And remember, um, I think you were a Beyonce fan, right? In Warwick.
Always, still am.
I remember one of the techniques we learned over there was, inspired by Beyonce and how Beyonce is able to kind of have this alter ego Sasha Fierce. And, when she goes on stage, it's like, the switch turns on and
Yeah.
she's naturally quite introverted, but suddenly on stage, she's an absolute diva. And it really is teaching us a lot of hacks like this. And then also a lot of, real actionable habits. So things like, journaling, different forms of journaling, different forms of mindfulness. Um, there was a lot of mindful listening, a lot of sharing experiences, really creating like this safe and vulnerable space for all of us. And yeah, it was almost 7, 8 years back, so struggling to remember the exact details. Um, but very inspired by that, I then started, facilitating workshops on my own and with others on weekends. So using similar themes. So, things like, yeah, we really looked at, how do you actually cultivate a sense of purpose? How do you, discover your own core values? How do you, move towards this concept of ikigai or whatever it is? And again, a lot of combining that with mindfulness and things like that. And so I would do these workshops on weekends, typically collaborating with others, these like wellness experts, psychologists. I did workshops for close to 2,000 people over a span of 2 years as a passion project. And a lot of those workshops were very, geared towards personal growth, right? So it was like, how do you be the best version of yourself, so to speak? But in 2019, then, I had my own struggles, so where health-wise, I had an autoimmune issue, which, flared up, a lot of inflammation in my body. And for about 6 months, it was hard to really do anything. And that was the first time I felt like it was quite crippling. You can talk anything you want about things like personal growth and, being the best version of yourself. But when you're actually going through, issues with your mental and physical health, all that has to be put on pause. So
Yeah.
I then started, just appreciating how important mental health is overall. And, started to eventually bounce back from that. Again, some of the people I used to collaborate with on workshops, some of the psychologists and therapists and experts really helped me at that point. Again, went back towards facilitating some workshops, bringing a lot of the mental health aspect into it. And I think everyone I was, speaking to, and once you make someone feel actually vulnerable, you realize that everyone is struggling with their emotional or mental health in some way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it was the start of 2020 where, all these experiences came together. I felt my skill set was right. The time was right career wise to actually take the plunge into something, entrepreneurial. And yeah, mental health felt like a space where, irrespective of what the report said, my own take on it was the way the physical health industry had grown, over the last 20, 30 years, mental health is going to see that growth. I was very convinced about that. And it impacts everyone at some point in their life. So I said, yeah, let me do this. And that's then how Evolve was born.
That's amazing because it sounds like, that kind of grounding in your early 20s, everyone can really use. And especially in a time like today where mental health is actually seen as a global crisis and not just
Yeah.
something that affects, a small segment of the society. But it sounds like, you were able to go through through your autoimmune disease because you had this grounding in your mental health techniques to be able to deal with what you were going through, and it gave you a lot of grounding to be able to know that there would be a way out of this, and this wasn't the end of the world, so to speak. But coming to the mental health problem of today, we are living in a time where words like depression, anxiety, and other issues have become very mainstream. We've gone from a society that didn't discuss mental health to now it being the runner in our conversations. While there's a lot of stigma attached to getting help and going for therapy, there's also an issue with user adoption in this space. Given that you've been building in this space for so long, what are the broader trends that you are seeing, and what is the true market size as a founder building in this space?
Yeah, there's quite a bit to unpack in that in the
Yeah.
question. Um, so just coming to the first part, where I think because COVID really accelerated the adoption of a lot of mental health vocabulary. So during that time, I think people suddenly started talking about things like loneliness, depression, anxiety. Um, we're now increasingly talking about things like neurodiversity, so adult ADHD, autism. So I feel, and I think Gen Z has done a really good played their part actually in really making some of this vocabulary mainstream, right? So even whether it's words like gaslighting or things like that, where these were all things that would impact someone in terms of their mental health, but no
Yeah.
one had the vocabulary to actually speak it, right? It would just be like, "Oh, I'm not feeling okay," but now you have different. I mean, people know about different anxiety disorders. Um, so I do think that is actually a really good thing that people are talking about it. In fact, a lot of the user research we do, a lot of the Gen Z in US and they learn about mental health through TikTok and Instagram, right? And that's a double-edged sword because on one hand, it's good that people talk about this, but at the same time, it's kind of counterbalanced off negatively by the culture of toxic positivity also.
Yeah.
Where people don't necessarily, a lot of words like depression need to be used very sparingly, right? Because
Yeah.
it is something that's clinical. It has a lot of weight to it.
Yeah.
But a lot of, yeah, influencers or in the, someone who's not, like, the terminology is something like languishing, where, you're not feeling okay, but people will just misconstrue as depression. And so I do think, there's good and bad to this becoming so common in whatever mainstream vocabulary and pop culture. Um, in terms of the market, um, so the way the mental health market is structured is, there's a spectrum from mental wellness to mental illness. So on one end, you have someone who's flourishing and, in a fairly okay state of mind, but then languishing, where you're not doing so well, and that could just be, episodic stress, like you're going through a breakup, or just job stress. And then you have, the mental illness part of it, which is typically clinical, and things like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, clinical depression, different anxiety disorders. Um, and typically what happens is, it's a bell curve, and, you have about 15% who are experiencing mental illness at some point in time, and, potentially experiencing mental illness now, or will experience mental illness. So that's typically about 15 to 17%.
Yeah.
Um, the Even for those who are flourishing, it's a constant cycle in all our lives. So between flourishing to languishing, right, it's a constant.
Yeah.
It depends on, it's always cyclical. There's no permanent state of mind that any of us can have. So whether it's mental wellness or mental illness, I think, you know it impacts everyone, right? The awareness levels are what actually brings someone into the market for mental health, so to speak, in terms of their willingness to adopt products or adopt services like therapy. But just on an underlying basis, it impacts everyone. As the awareness of the market is growing, like it rightly has, I think the adoption is starting to increase, right? So on one end of the spectrum for adoption, you have, entry level digital products, which is currently, let's say, where a lot of Evolve's audiences, all the way down to, therapy, and then also psychiatry.
Yeah.
Um, right, so there's a lot of product services, and the mental health market, at least in US, a lot of the reports will talk about it being, 400, $500 billion. But if you break that down, a lot of that is actually the pharma market. So, for pharmaceutical products for mental health, you then have, therapy, which is also a massive segment, probably, over $100 billion in itself. And then you have a lot of the digital products, or let's say the non-service products, which will be industries like self-care or mental well-being, which again are, really large industries. So they're
Yeah.
also like, 40-50 billion dollar industries. um, so mental health is, it has to be broken down. You have to figure, what part of it you're playing in. But, no matter what part you're playing in, each of them have very large market size. And again, I'm talking from a global perspective.
Yeah.
This is not India first. India currently has probably, the market size in India would probably be less than $1 billion right now, and very geared towards the clinical illness, the mental illness side. So even a lot of the VCs, their thesis is more on, building centers and rehab centers, and, so Amaha, for example, which has raised $6 million, is now building in-person therapy centers. There's
Yeah.
Suku, and there's a couple of others, but very geared towards, service oriented in India.
That's very interesting in a market like India, because India is also known as the most depressed country in the world. And to, just peg the number at 1 billion sounds very shocking, because if we are all affected by it in a country, how can the market size only be that, right? So one thing
Yeah.
that makes me wonder is that, are people just not seeking help because of the stigma? And the second aspect to that is, why should the pharma and the therapy market control the entire share of it, right? Like you rightly said, I think there are offline centers which a lot of
Yeah.
VCs prefer, because it makes it more clinical and more routine. There are in people coming in, so you can capture the footfall on a digital product. While you can get downloads, but getting users to adopt it is a big challenge. And that's where I've also seen, as an investor in consumer tech businesses and mental health apps as well, that most of the users, even though they have the intent to get better, but the adoption or the compliance is not there, right? As in, they'll download the app but not end up using it. What are
Yeah.
some of the things that you have learned about users? Because I'm sure you keep doing deep user insight sessions. So what are the insights there for audience to understand what is happening in this space?
Yeah, so when I said, I think, the market size that I was referring to is more just a function or a derivative of what people are currently spending in mental health. India is a very interesting market where, people either tend to repress their emotions or be very escapist. And again, this is globally as well, people tend to be escapist. So, if you look at someone who's coming home after a bad day at work, you know, it's you can get lost in the world of Netflix, and that's also putting a band-aid on your stress or your state of mind for the time for that time, right? So there's a lot of pretty much any so many digital products, there's so many physical products, industries like alcohol, all of these are actually also catering towards mental health in some ways.
Yeah.
So it's not that people don't spend on products or services that are going to numb their mind or make them feel better. It's not mental health in the traditional sense. Having said that, I think every therapist we speak to, every psychiatrist we speak to, the trends are that the number of patients that are coming to them is constantly growing. Some of them are at capacity. So I think at a micro level, that trend, at least that market is growing. And yeah, from a digital point of view, there's again, like India is an interesting culture, and how you culturally solve for it is also very interesting. So, for example, you now have astrology apps, right? Like so,
Yeah.
AstroTalk, and these apps are have realized actually it's a great insight that when Indians want answers, it's not therapists, but traditionally you go
Astrologers.
to
Yeah.
astrologers and gurus, and so it's taking that insight, which I think has actually been fairly brilliant. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you combine all of these together, then yeah, the market size is much larger, and it is growing at a healthy pace. So at least in urban metros and things like that. And then in rural, we're also seeing things like, for example, de-addiction centers. So a lot of mental health issues manifest with, let's say, addiction or drug abuse, things like that. And then how it plays out into what people are willing to spend on is the interesting thing, right? It's not that people might not necessarily want to see a therapist, but if it's a functional thing like a de-addiction center, which is helping them not cure, but at least help them with their addiction issues. That again, so it depends how you define the market for mental health and what is the scope of that market. If you're defining, anyone who's, let's say, stressed or anxious and spending money on anything, then I would argue that these astrology apps, astrologers in general as a market, pundits as a market,
Yeah.
religion as a market, all this can come in as well.
Yeah, I had Manu from Vama, who's building in this space, and he was mentioning that in India, pundits are looked upon as therapists, because you literally go to them for peace of mind about dealing with uncertainty, and that's what causes a lot of mental health issues for people, not knowing how to deal with uncertainty or stressful times, or when
You
will
also
I
you also
expect
sometimes
them?
just want an assurance for every single decision.
Yeah.
So I think in India as a culture we are averse to taking decisions, and just so even if you look at a traditional, you go to any restaurant, right, and you see like a big family for dinner out there or joint family. What you'll notice is there's no one actually taking the lead on ordering. Everyone's like, oh, should we order this? And then they wait for validation, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's a very cultural thing. So even if it's like, oh, should I buy house A or house B? I don't want to take that decision. I want to actually leave it to, pundit or someone who I can eventually, fall back and say that, oh, it wasn't my decision, it was someone else's.
Yeah, blame it on the Vastu in your Kundli to not take
Exactly.
accountability for your actions. But it's very interesting that you said that, what's happening with Gen Z, right? Like a lot of the times I've personally seen when I've hired younger folks, a lot of them do use words like depression and anxiety. Oh, I couldn't do this because, I had an anxious episode, or, and things like that. There are things where I think Gen Z takes mental health conversations very casually. And it's not to say as you advance in your life, life only gets harder, right? With more and more responsibilities and roles that you keep on adding on to yourself. So at what point from user research and user insights would you say is the best time to start building your foundation in the space, right? Like how can you equip yourself when you're very young to be able to navigate all the life's roller
Mm.
coasters and things? And can you prevent having very serious episodes if you know ways to manage yourself very early on?
Uh, Again,
Very
I think,
heavy loaded question. I
yeah,
don't
this is
expect
this
you
is
to.
a this is an interesting one.
Yeah.
It gets a little philosophical as well. I think personally, there are different stages of your life, and obviously every stage is has its own beauty. Um, there's also, factually our neocortex will fully develop, between 25 to 30, right? And that's when you start to automatically or naturally start to become more grounded. During your teenage years and early adolescence, there's a lot of hormones, testosterone. There's a lot of emotional outbursts, and that's all part of it. I think that's part of growing up and experiencing that.
Yeah.
And then 25 to 30 is generally when you start to, from a physiological standpoint, also start to mature a little bit. Um, I would argue that that could be an interesting time, and that is probably the latest in your life. If you really want someone to build that resilience, and probably that I think that mid 20s is a really good time, because you've sort of you've been through those, at least you've been through some ups and downs, because a lot of this, you can't, it's not theory. You can't put someone in a classroom and be like, hey, this is how you build resilience. um, you have to kind of go through things yourself. um, I think it's really important for people to be self-aware. So self-awareness can be taught even in schools. Self-awareness can be taught in colleges, wherever it is, right? But just self-awareness in terms of basic stuff like, okay, what emotions am I going through right now? What am I feeling? Am I feeling like my mind is racing? Am I feeling like I'm not currently in control of my thoughts? At least that awareness can be built.
Yeah.
What you do with that awareness, whether you're able to control yourself or not, is secondary. But I think that awareness is really important, because any any mindfulness or working on your mental health or anything always starts with self awareness. So I think that muscle of just getting more self-aware and building that can start from a very early age. um, and then actually combining that with tools and techniques to really drive resilience, I think can happen probably in your 20s, once you've been through some highs and lows. And I think it's also very important for people to just experience everything in life. I think that is something that's also really important, because the more you repress things, the more you repress your emotions, the more you repress your wants or desires, it tends to manifest in very ugly ways, later on. And we see that, in India, obviously, it's really topical right now with what's happening in Calcutta and other
Yeah.
cities. Um, but again, that yeah, I think um, yeah, I don't know when the time is, but this is my perspective at least.
Yeah, very interesting. And given that you started building for India, but then eventually found a bigger user base in the US, what was your experience of building for both markets? It must have been dramatically different building for the Indian audience versus the US audience. So now that you've evolved into a global platform, which is the market that you see potentially evolve growing into the best?
Um, yeah, so I mean, the first thing is that even from the first version of Evolve that we put out like more than 3 years back, um, we started to see more organic adoption in markets like US and UK. And when I think back to it, I think at least personally with my own life experiences, being in the UK for 7 years and all of that, I think I was closer to understanding a global persona, a Western persona, rather than Bharat. Um,
Right.
right, which is why I didn't come up with the idea of AstroTalk. In hindsight, that would have
Yeah.
been a great one to start. Um, but yeah, so we've always seen that, and then so I think just taking a step back, right, with Evolve also now in the current avatar, we're focusing on very inclusive mental health, building for the LGBT community and other vulnerable segments. And where that leads to slight differences is firstly, there's so much more awareness and openness around conversations in the West.
Yeah.
So it's not that like in India, people are still struggling to even um, you know take that time or have that luxury to even process their thoughts and feelings around, let's say, gender identity or sexuality. Whereas, you know, in the US or Canada or UK, it is, it's very natural.
Yeah.
It's natural for people to question themselves while growing up, um, and just be out and open about it. There's no stigma attached. So I think when we're dealing with mental health, also it's much easier in it's relatively easier in those markets because it's more about the awareness is there, right? People have already explored themselves. It's now about dealing with the issues around family relationships, things like that. In India, you don't even have the an open market, so to speak.
Yeah.
The second thing is the willingness to spend on mental health, right? In India, what we realized, and it didn't take us long to realize this, but the willingness to spend on products and services that are not meeting your daily functional needs is very very limited. And in a world where Netflix and all are struggling to sell subscriptions, I was reading, I think I was reading this article where I think it was Geo Savan and their revenue numbers I was reading, and it was
Yeah, like
relatively low compared to
Ghana,
what
after raising
what I would
hundreds of
experience, yeah,
millions,
and
got
Ghana as
acquired
well.
for 25 lakhs. So, that really shows, even for a product like music, which I think resonates with most of India,
Yeah.
people don't want to pay for services like that.
Even like, for example, a company like ShareChat and a lot of the other companies that are now tech driven consumer first apps, when you actually put the true cost of delivering a tech service, and you take in your cloud costs and all of that into the picture, it's very hard to actually make money.
Yeah.
In fact, you're almost certainly not going to make money. Um, and so for what we were doing, we knew that it's not possible. Having said that, we started to see some early signs of success, like in US, UK, in terms of at least willingness to pay. And the good thing about building and doing what we're doing, firstly, is we have a very strong thesis on building India for the world on consumer. So while the last 5 to 10 years have shown that it's possible with SaaS products,
Yeah.
I think the next 5 to 10 years will show that we can actually deliver world class consumer first products. And we've been very focused on the niche that we're in and building a good brand, a very good user experience, and going towards PMF over there. And in the B2C, in the world of B2C apps, also there's a lot of amazing benchmarking and reports that you get. So whether it's from Apple, from Google, other third-party services. So we're very clear on what those metrics we need to hit are in order for us to be profitable, right? And that's a journey we're on. So it doesn't, as long as we are, moving closer towards being top quartile in things like your retention rates or your churn rates or the percentage you are subscribing, we know that we have it in us to actually build a profitable India to the world story. And you see recently, for example, there's Flow, which raised $200 million in
Yeah.
the US, focusing on women's health. Again, 5 years back, no one would have ever thought that an app that's going to charge you a subscription to track your periods and
Yeah.
other stuff around your sexual and reproductive health will actually go on to become a unicorn. Um, so I think the market is very interesting in the US, where it's normalized to actually pay for subscriptions, unlike India.
Yeah.
In India, it's very, unless you bundle it in, you're doing it for like 1 rupee and 2 rupees and stuff. No one, at scale, it doesn't adopt, and we don't want to be playing that game right now where we're building numbers without actual revenue. Um,
That's a very interesting choice as founders, right? Because I think you started monetization also very early on in the journey, whereas most VCs or investors, I'm sure that you would have spoken to at that point, would have been like, why don't you go after numbers? Why don't you go
yeah,
after growth at all costs? Because that is what has happened across consumer tech businesses in India. You refer to ShareChat, and like there are so many countless examples, right? Like Koo also recently shut down, not being able to monetize. So these are real
exactly.
issues in the Indian ecosystem. But I think investors have also learned it the hard way that you do need to focus on monetization. So,
Yeah, it's
um,
funny. Like the same investors that told us that in 2021 and 2022 are suddenly in 2023 echoing a very different story.
yeah,
But again, I think investors come from a certain place, and they have certain targets to meet in terms of exits and IRRs, and it's about
yeah,
doing what the wider investment community sees as doing as being the quote unquote right thing, um, so that it's easier for them to, let's say, or their portfolio companies to raise follow-on rounds. But having said that, as an entrepreneur, and you learn this only after you're in for at least 4 or 5 years, because then you go through at least one cycle
yeah.
where you realize that a lot of these things are like, it's like your flavor of the day, right? The flavor of the day is crypto, and then it changes to AI, and then it changes to growth at all costs, and then it changes to something else.
We've been
Um,
through like 5, 6 different cycles in just the last 2, 3 years,
exactly.
right? Yeah,
Yeah. Now Gen AI is the
yeah,
or AI is the flavor of the day. Um, we've actually been, you know, I wouldn't say fortunate or not, but I think we've managed to, so far at least, all the money we've raised also has kind of been from investors who align with a slightly larger time perspective. Where mental health as a market. So, firstly, from an India point of view, the writing's on the wall, but a lot of VCs are now beginning to have thesis, make active investments, and the consensus is that by 2026, 2027, there will actually be an inflection point even in India, because insurance will come in. A
yeah,
lot of the ground awareness that's now building will eventually start catalyzing the whole market. Um, we've raised from investors around the world, so global angels. And recently, we've also been fortunate to raise some grant capital as well. So what we realized in India, and so for example, there's an organization called ACP Grants, but it was actually put together by some of the leading VC partners in India. So for
oh
example,
right,
Prashant
ACT
Prakash,
during COVID it became,
yes.
yes, got it,
So
right.
now, so ACT Grants now has like a massive corpus. A lot of their, contributors still continue to be some of these VCs and, HNIs who want to be more philanthropic
Yeah,
in some of their outlook. And so recently, ACT was a great example where, the IC for the final investment committee for ACT actually had, folks like Prashant Prakash from Axel, Shekhar Kirani,
yeah,
um, some of these VC partners, and we were pitching to them. But again, they recognize that things like climate tech or ed tech, in some ways, also it will take a while for some of these markets to mature.
yeah.
Right. So, like mental health, it does require some patient capital. So, we've been fortunate to find some of these partners also, where we're not playing the traditional VC game where, oh, we have to, every quarter we have to grow 15 to 20% at all cost. Because, yeah, honestly, we would have run out of funds last year, um, had we actually followed that approach with nothing to show for. I think the more you're able to buy some amount of time, and then yes, I think if you do see signs of PMF or like unit economics in terms of your CAC to LTV ratios, by all means, I think then growth at all costs
Yeah.
needs to come in, but not until you hit that mark.
Yeah, I think there was this whole trend of founders where, they would raise significant rounds of funding, do secondaries in a big way, live very lavish lifestyles while, the company was just a zombie shell which was existing, not much going on within the company. And, it literally burnt investors' money. It was
Yeah,
literally putting money on fire, right? So that's a very different approach. And we saw signs of that during the pandemic and even post that. But I think now there is more rationality that's prevailed again, where investors want to invest in businesses that will actually make money, and
thankfully.
paying
Yeah.
attention to fundamentals. But given that you pitched to both investors in India and US, what were some of the differences that you noticed while fundraising?
Um, so I think with India, a lot of the investors want models that are have some kind of tried and tested approach to it, right? So it's a bit of like, I would say, defensive approach to investing, where you don't want to really take like
Yeah.
um, bets on something that doesn't exist. Whereas typically in the US, um, you will kind of find appetite for even things that, let's say, are not very mainstream. Of course, given that we, at least the last 2 years, we've been focusing also on the LGBT community in India, just educating people on how big the TAM is globally, and how big the opportunity is, proves slightly to be a challenge. Whereas outside India, and even in India, like some of the investors who have global exposure, will not question it. But I think, yeah, those are some of the differences. I do think, though, in the US, especially now, um, it is harder to get investments if you're not deep tech. So I think that is one big thing we've realized, and that's something we need to also really introspect on and figure. Um, at least with what we're doing today, is an opportunity for us to really get into more tech based solution, and something that's actually unique from a point of view of solving mental health challenges. Again, that's something we're constantly working towards. But I think for, yeah, top tier US VCs, it's very hard without you know that deep tech layer now.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's true for most consumer tech businesses, because everyone is looking to see what will happen in the AI space. Now, software is literally, unless it's AI first, no one wants to look at it in terms of consumer tech, because there aren't very many use cases which have emerged so far.
yeah.
It's mostly been on B2B side. So, consumer tech founders are also struggling to fundraise because, how do you show usage of AI when your platform wasn't built
But
like
I
that?
think also, but what is interesting is in some of the consumer tech companies that have been breakouts, right? Let's say, for example, Flow,
Yeah.
uh, Duolingo, maybe like even Headspace and Calm to some extent, or a lot of health and fitness apps that are, clocking 50 to $100 million in revenue. I don't think it's really been cutting edge technology,
Yeah.
because the end consumer doesn't care. What they care about is actual functional
Yeah.
utility and you solving a challenge. And I think a lot of these apps have proved that you don't need to be like, yeah, crazy new age tech, but you need to do the basics right. You need to have your user experience on point. You need to have, your product has to be absolutely sensational. And that is honestly the path that we are emulating at Evolve. Um, you know, yes, you can look at bringing AI and stuff like that, but the consumer doesn't, at least at a B2C level, the consumer doesn't care. Right? The consumer, let's say, for example, on I mean, even Pocket FM is a good example, right? Because they are currently at 100 million ARR
They've
plus, and
actually now hit 200 million ARR in
that's
the recent
amazing.
numbers. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. In like last quarter when I saw it was like 100 million ARR,
Yeah.
but they are a fantastic example where it's about giving high quality audio content to users.
Yeah.
Um, if and they are using AI now to scale up that content, right? So to kind of, let's say, generate scripts and take even the script to audio part and all, they sort of optimize that process. That's a great example. Now the end user doesn't care whether that content came through AI or was human generated. As long
Yeah.
as it's good quality content, they're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
I think that is the B2C user mindset. They are not going to pay for an app simply because it has AI.
Yeah.
You need to be first solving their challenge. And I think at Evolve, that's what we're focusing on. And we have a very clearly defined persona. We know what stage of the mental health journey they're on, um, and we're solving for it.
I think the interesting point that you're trying to drive there is that you should build your business for consumers and not for investors. right?
Yes,
Sometimes I also
absolutely.
feel that founders get carried away trying to match their what they're building to what the investors thesis is, whereas being consumer first and listening to what your customer is telling you and building a business on top of that, very different approach. And sometimes the founders don't even realize when you get carried away and just believe the investor's story more than what you're learning from the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I said, I think there's enough success stories in B2C for us to like really be motivated day in day out. We
Yeah.
know we have a very clear idea of the different metrics and exactly what we need to hit to make this successful and profitable. So yeah, whether I think where investors do come in is suddenly they'll talk about yeah, what's cutting edge, what's new, what's your GTM, why aren't you focusing on XYZ.
Yeah.
um, and I think these are great perspectives to have. So we've honestly enjoyed a lot of the conversations that we've had with investors. So even the first time we pivoted, a lot of the pivots have actually come from conversations with investors and getting a lot of consensus in terms of especially if you're starting to hear the same thing again and again,
Yeah.
you have to introspect as a founder and also be like, okay, there's something to be done here.
Yeah.
um, yeah, but I think B2C definitely solve for the consumer first. Um, and yeah, just don't ever lose that focus. um, and then of course distribution is really hard with B2C. So and again, where investors typically they avoid B2C is also because CACs are very high
Yeah.
traditionally. So solving for that is also one of our big challenges. It's like yeah, in today's world of like digital marketing and acquisition and stuff, it is very expensive to acquire customers. And so yeah, the best way to do it is organic traction. What we've been focusing on is, so for example, being an app, obviously your two stakeholders are Google and Apple. Um, with Google, we've been fortunate. We've been awarded by them. We've had a lot of, good exposure. But I think, some of the things that's actually materialized into, as an example, would be something like Google Play Pass. So Play Pass is like their super
Yeah.
subscription for users across the world now. Evolve is actually among like only two or three health and fitness apps on the Play Pass, and globally is about 100 apps that users will get access to. So we actually don't have to worry about our CAC at all because
Yeah.
Google distributes it as part of Play Pass, and we get a royalty revenue, right? So that's like a great example of the CAC to LTV to CAC actually being infinite at a slightly smaller scale. And
Yeah.
as we as our product market, as our product metrics get better, that that royalty revenue starts to go up. Apple as well, we're now working very closely with their teams, their global editorial team. So we actually got featured in the US recently for the first time on Apple. Um, there's just a lot of excitement with Apple as well now on how we can keep building for the iOS ecosystem. So even we've got our sights on like launching something for Vision Pro as well by the end of this year. Um, and so these are the things that will help us a little bit with our distribution, right? So the whole idea is how do you get as much free distribution as you can
Yeah.
by getting featured, and then of course having a product that users want to talk about. So even in the US, when I talk to a lot of our users, they've heard about us because people have shared about us on Discord servers and different groups and communities. And so those are the stories that make me happy, because if we're
Yeah.
moving towards the closer we can move towards zero CAC, that is when I get really happy as a founder.
Yeah, zero CAC is literally the dream for any consumer founder. But what you said is very interesting because obviously the acquisition costs have never been higher, right? For
Yes.
any consumer tech business or even consumer brands, right? And
Yeah.
what really makes a consumer business is actually retention or your repeat usage, because you cannot keep spending money to acquire new users. You just have to make the product work for existing users and make sure they're
Yeah.
coming back to you constantly. And that is a great way to build a consumer business. But given that you're right now getting exposure so well from Google and Apple both, obviously this is incredible when they're supporting you and tailwinds are in your favor. But does it worry you sometimes that there's also a risk of platform dependence, where they are charging such large commissions on top of it? And in the US we've seen multiple examples of it, right, where the companies, once they get deplatformized, then start having issues with Apple, Google, and there are so many many lawsuits against these companies
Yeah.
as well. So does that worry you as a founder?
Yes. So because I mean, obviously the state and scale we're at right now, I think it's important to have your like eggs in a few baskets,
Yeah.
right? So uh, till we get to maybe like $5 to $10 million revenue, ARR, which we have our sights on in the next 2 years. Till that time, I think it's very important for us to work closely on, two or three distribution channels and really maximize that.
Yeah.
Um, Parallelly, yes, we will have to, think of other options. So one of the trends we're now seeing in consumer businesses is, web to app flows. So rather than,
Yeah.
let's say, an Instagram ad taking you to the app page to download the app, you're now, doing a bit of like an onboarding and stuff on a website. So you're
Yeah.
actually giving people a flavor of the app. You're making them, pay for their subscriptions on the website itself, and then you download the app. So um, again, how the regulatory ecosystem moves around this, we can only play a wait and watch game in some of these things. So
Yeah.
for us we know the problem we're solving. For a lot of other things, we tend to be, followers, right, where we see what trends are working, um, and constant experimentation. So the kind of paywalls that were working 1 year back is now not, some of the
Yeah.
paywalls have changed, the ones that work, some of the ad flows, some of the onboarding flows. So a lot of those we play catch up. So we just keep studying other apps that are doing well, keep experimenting and go from there.
Yeah, as a consumer founder, you should always be experimenting with different GTM channels. I think, because you never know where one channel stops giving, and then you can't be too dependent on that. But you touched upon narrowing your focus to LGBT while you started building Evolve. What were some of the insights that led you to that evolution? Because a lot of investors must have told you that is this even a large enough market to build for? And I remember having this conversation with you when you were trying to fundraise at that time. So what was that evolution journey like?
So again, firstly, I think it was first building our own conviction as founders on whether, we felt this was one, a large enough market. Was it a differentiated need? Did it feel like a real gap in the market? Um, the pivot actually started when, and it was actually due to a lot of experimentation. So it was a very simple experiment that we ran during Pride Month in 2021, where we kind of put Pride flag on our app icon, started to see conversion rates actually double. um, we then, while a lot of brands will shift after Pride Month ends, we just decided to keep the experiment going through July as well. And we noticed that the trends actually did not change. So that was the first, where suddenly our CAC fell by half, literally. Right.
This
So
was
we,
when, in terms of
in
timeline?
2021,
Okay. So about a
2021.
year into you building the app.
Yes, a
Got
year
it.
into us. So that was our first inclination that, okay, there's something happening here, right? Because normally when you do experiments, you'll see like maybe a 5 to 10% increase or decrease if you're lucky.
Yeah.
You're seeing like something go down by half was unreal. That was our first inclination. We still didn't act on it, for a few months later. Um, but at the same time, we were kind of doing a lot of research and trying to segment the market in different ways. The next thing, obviously, at that time we knew we were building India for the world. So had we been focused on India, there's no way we would have even taken this insight.
Yeah.
But India for the world, we then started to actually segment, the market size, at least in a country like US, where we were looking at mental health and specifically the LGBT community, and just estimating what we thought the market share of the LGBT community was in the mental health space. It turned out to be a sizable number, and we did this through secondary data from Facebook Ads Manager and audience estimation, different reports we were reading. It turned out to be a massive number that
What is the
we
number?
so we estimated that around 20 to 25% of the mental health market in the US would actually comprise of members of the LGBT community. And when you extend it to
Wow.
allies, and parents and things like that, it's an even larger number. Um, and some of the statistics we were seeing was, especially in Gen Z, and mental health is very driven by millennial and Gen Z and the newer
Yeah.
generations. But in Gen Z in the US, one in five Gen Z now identify as queer, according to some of the large scale surveys that are done. Whereas in millennials it was one in 10. So roughly we're talking about 10 to 15% of the adult population, and then on top of that, their affinity to actually seek out mental health solutions is much higher because the awareness is much higher.
Yeah.
The severity of the issue is much higher. So they typically, members of the community will typically tend to seek out a lot more intervention. So when you think of it as a proportion of the market for mental health solutions, it's much higher than 15%. Um, Funnily enough, a lot of at that time we were raising like our first round. It was like a pre-seed round, and after we came up with the thesis of building for the LGBT community globally, and the other thing is it was very authentic to us. So like on the founding team, on the rest of our team, we had members from the community, so very deeply um, resonated with the problem firsthand of some of the nuanced stressors that members of the community face.
Yeah.
And I think that was also really important. We started to talk to some of our users who were, on the app, who were part of the community, started to really understand some of the stuff, solutions that they were looking at. What were some of the problems that brought them here? Started to read a lot of research papers as well. So we read through about 100 research papers, that were at the intersection of mental health and the LGBT community. So all of this, we had a very good thesis in mind. And a lot of the investors started to actually really like that thesis for our pre-seed round. So it was much easier for us to raise that pre-seed round as well after we shifted our thesis and focus rather than being a generic mental health app for everyone.
Yeah, but that's very interesting because if you think about the US population, roughly around 30 million, you're saying that 10 to 20% of the adult population qualifies under that. So you're looking at roughly like at least 10 to 20 million people
Yeah,
who can possibly pay for this app. And so the
exactly.
market in itself is like huge, right? And in a
Yeah.
market like US where paying for subscriptions comes very naturally to that audience. So that is actually a pretty incredible market size and users that haven't been built for before.
In fact, the like some of the stories we hear, like when we speak to our users, right? Like I've spoken to someone who was, had been kicked out of his family home in Philadelphia and was then in a government shelter, right? With actually surviving on, just stuff from the government and, food stamps and things like that, but still was paying for Evolve.
Wow.
Um, right. And so that was, that's the kind of user that we'll have. We've had a lot of users who are actually not in the best state, financially, but also willing to pay because it is that safe space for them, and it's much cheaper than finding the right therapist. And so those are some of the nuanced pain points that we know of in the US. So in the US, what is very interesting is that 70% of our users in the US actually are using Evolve either alongside therapy or they're just weaning off a therapist. So that is a very interesting insight, where they're already paying for therapy or they've paid for therapy in the past, right? So it's not that payment is the challenge. It's
Yeah.
honestly if we're able to give them the right value and the right product, and that's the PMF journey we're on. We know that payment is not the issue. A lot of investors you talk to, whether it's India or US, one of the facts they acknowledge about even the LGBT community is the propensity to pay is overall much higher.
Yeah.
Because typically, they're less likely to have families, or the disposable income does tend to be higher. So
Yeah,
it's an
it's a
interesting
completely
it's an interesting
underserved
segment.
market because no one's building for them, right?
Yeah, and
So
it does take a lot of guts, and like even for a founding team to actually say something like I'm going to build for the LGBT community.
yeah,
No one does that. So I think like we've been really courageous and bold in that step. And what it's done for us is it's narrowed our focus, but it's also attracted a lot of allies for our own mission, right? So, for
yeah,
example, Google and Apple being absolute allies because of the mission that we're on. Whether it's ACT grants or like we've also got a grant from USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development. We've got a grant from them now. But it's really interesting the kind of whether it's been people who just want to help us out, whether it's been some of these grants. It's
Yeah,
just interesting what it's attracted for us.
I'm sure you'll find champions, especially if someone's living on welfare and still paying for Evolve.
Yeah.
I think that's real ground level impact. And as founders, what else could you really want,
In
right?
fact, one of our champions in the US, she happened to be the chairperson for an organization called Harlem Pride, which is one of the oldest pride organizations in the US and in the Harlem area of New York. And she had discovered the app on I think it was on the Play Store on her own, right? She was using the app for like a few months, and then one day she wrote to me saying that I'm the founder of Harlem Pride. Let's collaborate, all that. But then she was invited to the White House for an event, for I think it was Black Pride Month or something, around the intersection of the African Americans and Pride. And so she was invited to the White House, and she on her own decided to take Evolve. She took a
Wow.
flyer of Evolve, talked about it. She then made us actual like sponsors for Harlem Pride in New York. So I was there last year delivering the keynote speech and then sharing the stage with like the mayor of New York and the governor of New York State. And it was, yeah, like some of the champions we've had have just been amazing. I don't think you can have this at a B2C level, unless you really stand for a user's problem. So I think that, like, some of these stories are testament to the fact that, if you're able to actually keep getting a product better, um, I have no doubt that, we'll be on a very interesting path towards, um, yeah, profitability and good revenue growth.
Yeah, I think you already are in its all sense. But like, given that you're based out of India and you said that, as a founding team also to take a stance is not very easy. It is very courageous to be able to do that. Have you faced any kind of backlash in India? Because unfortunately, we keep seeing examples of that, right?
Uh, I think less in India. We've, but once in a way, what happens is that we will go like probably we get shared, on some group in the US or like even countries like sometimes Bangladesh and things like
Yeah.
that, and suddenly we'll notice like a lot of negative reviews on, let's say, the App Store, the Play Store, and then obviously because it's homophobic, it's anyway against Google and Apple's policies, and they get removed.
Yeah.
But we do get that. I mean, I do get hate mails. I've got like emails, yeah, saying like you're doing the work of the devil and you deserve death. And those. So we get those emails.
Yeah.
It's like when you put yourself out there on social media, also
Yeah.
you'll get a backlash or anything.
But that's when you
Uh,
know that you're truly relevant, also, right? Like the other way to look at it is that,
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't impact us
yeah,
one bit. What is very interesting is that we have, on the app we have these in-app communities where people can, it's like lived in shared experiences and stuff like that. And what we've noticed is, once in a way you'll have these trolls come in and then, put in like bigoted or hate remarks, and suddenly everyone in the community just stands up and stands up. And yeah, so for every one hater that we have, within the app we'll have like 50 people who are just gonna immediately take the reverse stance. But yeah, this happens whether it's on our ads, whether it's, yeah, app reviews, emails. It happens all over the world, not just India.
yeah. But I think that's when you truly know that you're building something which is very meaningful, and you have the ability to be able to deal with that kind of messaging as well. Because I'm sure it's not easy to get those kind of messages, but what the work that you're doing is so powerful. It truly is transforming lives, and that's why it needs to be out there in the world.
Yeah, I
So
think
that's
for every hate mail, I mean, some of the reviews, some of the emails that we like, the love emails we get, where like I'm so glad this app exists because I probably wouldn't be here, or this
yeah.
has helped me through like the roughest phase of my life, and like, yeah. So for every, or like the stories that I share of like someone who's in a homeless shelter and still paying for Evolve. Um, yeah, some of the love emails we get are like way, way, way. They just compensate for all of this.
Yeah, and coming to AI is obviously getting adopted by
The
all
flavor
consumers.
flavor of the
Yeah,
month.
like we already touched on. But personalization through AI is going to be a big theme for all consumer apps going forward. As a founder, how are you thinking about adopting AI into Evolve?
So I think the first thing with AI is to streamline our own internal processes. So especially on at a code level, right? So like right now we're actually building an iOS version of Evolve, for example, where just so that we can now actually start adopting the new features that Apple launches. We can build for Vision Pro and stuff like that. And there, we've actually assembled a team we've never built an iOS product before, so we're all
I
working.
thought you were already on iOS.
We are, but we've actually so we've been on iOS from the start, but we've built using React Native, which is a hybrid platform, so we're
Right.
able to
Got it.
ship the same things,
Yeah.
but we are not able to build like Apple first. So like for example on iOS 18, which launches in September, there are certain new features like Apple Intelligence or
Yeah.
app intents and stuff like that, which we're not able to build. So we're actually rebuilding the app in iOS, and that's an example where we're using AI just to ensure that our code is robust enough, or sense check some of that code optimization, other internal processes with content. So we talked about Pocket FM scaling up content, and I think it's looking at how we can maybe 10x the efficiency of our own content team internally.
Right.
So those are our first parts where we're at, or like text to voice, or those are the kind of things that we're looking at right now. Um, from a user standpoint, like I said earlier, also, I think, the user doesn't care. Like you can have, a lot of people will launch things like chatbots, but, chatbots are too
Yeah.
ubiquitous right now, just all over the place. We don't want to be doing AI for the sake of AI for the user. So with that, we are slightly, I wouldn't say behind the curve, but we are trying to narrow the problem statement from a user point of view that we can actually use AI for. And again, this is trying to be driven by consumer insights and data points, right? So like the data point where 70% of our users are either seeing therapy or were seeing therapy before,
Yeah.
um, tells me that maybe there's a case actually to use AI for, to improve the outcomes between the therapist and the client, for that user itself. So at a B2C
Yeah.
level. But again, these are things that we will learn through discovery. Our roadmaps for the next 2 to 3 quarters again have AI more at an internal facing level, and yeah, scaling up content and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've looked at some other companies also in this space, folks like Visa, Amaha. They were actually a part of the Meta Accelerator. So I've seen their journey from very early on. And then, we've invested in this company called Urban Health also, which is again
Yes.
focused in the US market, which is why I couldn't participate in your round. But tell me about the decision between B2C versus B2B, given that, you started with doing workshops. B2B
Yeah.
seems to be a very good recurring revenue stream for consumer businesses also, while you are building the consumer engine out. So, have you thought about that, or have you done B2B partnerships also?
So we've not done full fledged B2B, but we've sort of let it. Few things have happened organically. So for example, we've like for example at Google, we've worked very closely with their Pride chapter, and now Evolve is sort of like an inclusive benefit for Googlers across the world.
Wow.
It's like an employee perk
Yeah.
for Googlers. Um, that happened organically. We are trying to figure with a few other organizations as well as we speak in terms of what is it that we can actually do for their pride chapters, or from a diversity inclusion standpoint. Um, what we realized with a lot of mental health and wellness apps, whether it's Headspace, Visa, and anecdotally as well, the user adoption in companies tends to be very low. So you can sort of push your way through if needed also. But what is increasingly happening in the B2B space is a lot of headwinds around the actual ROI on them paying for, let's say you take Accenture paying for like 20,000 licenses, when only 100 or 200 will actually use it, right? So
Yeah.
suddenly, I think during COVID, it was obviously really good tailwinds, where every company wanted to safeguard themselves, and put stuff around mental health in employee benefits. I think that is now being challenged. So a lot of the models as well with B2B companies are changing. So rather than them paying upfront, it's things like, oh, I'll only pay you for the people who are using it, or
Right.
maybe I will co-pay with the users. So if it's a $50 subscription, let the user pay $10. I'm happy to pay 40, but that will ensure that I'm actually paying for someone who's actually using it. So I think some of these things that are coming up are actually headwinds for us to get into B2B and go full fledged into B2B.
Right.
If things happen organically, we're very happy to take it on. And again, what we've realized is especially with the stakeholders being, let's say, HR or wellness, there's a dime a dozen, apps out there or products out there. Differentiating is hard. Whereas what we've realized is that at least with the niche we're in and what we've built so far, a lot of our credibility actually allows us to work with chief diversity officers or sponsors of like pride chapters. And so budgets are much lower there, but we're just trying to figure out, if there is something scalable to be done in that space.
And that's interesting because I think we touched upon it before also, the problem of user adoption in this space. What do you think can actually improve user adoption? Because, in a world where there is every kind of distraction out there, it's literally going from one app to the other. You have entertainment, you have Instagram, you have TikTok, you have all the platforms out there to be able to not have to deal with your issues, right? So, is there a way to increase adoption, or do you think that will gradually happen over a period of time? What do you think?
I think at a macro level, we know awareness is growing, right? So we talked about this at the start. So I think
Yeah.
you know, people proactively searching for some of these, terms like self-care apps or mental health apps is increasing, which is a good thing for us. Um, in terms of adoption, typically you have 1 minute to impress a user, right? So
Yeah.
they download an app, they do the onboarding, they get a flavor of the app, and it's at that point they decide, do I want to give this app another shot? Do I want to pay for it or not? So I think that first 1 minute is really important. Um, Health and fitness as a category, again, you've got to make the user make an investment upfront. So like for example, even a gym, when you're going to check out a gym, if you don't pay on that day, you're probably never stepping
Yeah.
back into the gym. So it's the same thing with apps over here, where you're trying to kind of co-create a plan with the users on literally day zero, convince them that this is a great app for you.
Yeah.
Get them to invest. Without that investment, like I said, it's tough. Even with that investment, like from a point of view of, again, the if you think of like an imaginary hierarchy of apps in terms of, or categories in terms of like their ability to retain users, it's always linked to your dopamine and the subconscious recall. And so it's very hard for mental health apps to compete with, like you said, Instagram or Netflix, or I mean even gaming apps, news apps. In the pecking order, we are right at the, like, I would argue, almost like right at the bottom. Um,
Right.
and as much as you try and gamify, you can do anything you want. The benchmarks in the category for mental health apps is actually, for day 7 retention, day 30 retention is really poor compared to, let's say, social media apps or gaming apps. But
What is it for in the mental health space?
so like a good day 7 retention is like around 15%.
Yeah,
Um,
usually it's 20-25% for other consumer
Yeah,
apps.
like you're 10 to 15% and you're doing really well, you're top
Yeah.
quartile. Whereas, I mean, in other industries, yeah, gaming and stuff will go as high as 40 to 50%,
Yeah.
and day 30 tends to be around, 5 to 7% in mental health. Um, Eventually, yeah. So that's why I said, like, we know the benchmarks, and we've kind of been working towards hitting top quartile in a lot of these benchmarks. That's honestly the best we can do right now.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, for the user who is slightly serious, how do you make them make an investment on day one, and then make them sort of, or give them enough to value that membership or that subscription, and keep coming back. And it sounds easy, but it's super hard, right? That
Of
is
course.
that's the whole thing on consumer apps. If you're able to crack that, you get a breakout product. If not, then you're just kind of stuck in a very mediocre position.
Yeah.
Um, what was the second part of your question?
It
This,
was about, getting users to adopt it or start
yeah,
using it. Because, like if you just think about it, Instagram is so widely spread in terms of adoption, but it is also, one can argue that, it is one of the biggest reasons for our mental health issues also, right?
yeah.
Especially in the younger audience. So, like, the biggest perpetuators also tend to be the place for escapism right now, which, you're stuck in that vicious loop of getting hurt regardless. So how do you
Yeah,
deal
I
with
think, like I said, there's so much toxic positivity. It's like at an individual post level, you actually think
that?
this is positive for your mental health because someone's talking about their gratitude and their morning routines. But
Yeah,
it's actually the most toxic stuff because you're left comparing yourself to um, people actually faking a lot of this as well. So
yeah.
a lot of people are just faking everything on social media. And I've personally been off social media in the last almost 10 years. So
Wow.
um,
How do you do that?
I don't know. I mean, it's a. I think it was at university. Like I remember university when Snapchat came about. I was like, I'm done with
Yeah.
this. I'm not adopting one more thing. And then, yeah. So I never got into Snapchat to begin with. And then I think even Instagram and stuff, I weaned off like a
I
really
have
long time
to
back.
admit, I've just had a love and hate relationship where, I'll delete it for a while, but then be an obsessive user, delete it again. So
Uh,
unfortunately, it's not a very straightforward relationship.
yeah. The only thing I use right now is LinkedIn, but even there, it's like I post. I don't really consume a lot of content.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to teenagers and stuff, you will read some of this. You will impact your mental health. Um, the typical ways they look at it is exactly what you said, right? Suddenly it'll be a love-hate relationship, but
Yeah.
then love-hate is also extreme, right? So one of the
Yeah.
things that you personally realize as you build resilience is that flat curves and equilibriums are actually the
Better.
most amazing the most
Yeah.
amazing thing you can aspire to individually.
Yeah.
Whereas most of the people are still on this like extreme high spikes, and high crashes. Whether it's the typical person working Monday to Friday and then just absolutely binging over the weekend on alcohol and whatever other substances and all, and it's just setting themselves up for these constant ups and downs, which it's never yeah it's just not going to work for your mental health in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I know I need to keep that in balance. But coming back to your personal ambition for Evolve, what is the North Star that you're working towards?
Yeah, so for us, it's at a user level, it's obviously the percentage who are paying and happy with Evolve. So that funnel, right from, installing the app to paying to like being a happy paying subscriber and sort of, using it every day. That is our eventual North Star. So, we know our benchmarks, we know the category benchmarks. We have targets every quarter in terms of what we need to hit, and then you break that down into sub targets, right? So like that final funnel number is X, but then you break it down into different stages of the funnel. um, yeah, and that's what we chase at Evolve. And it's a
True.
function of a lot of things. It's a function of your subscription rates within the first 1 minute. It's a function of your core action percentage. It's a subscription of your day 7 retention. It's just so many of these things that then follow through from that.
Truly being the grounded person that I remember you to be, because most founders will say millions of dollars in revenue, or like $1 billion valuation, but I think everyone chases different things, and as a consumer founder especially, you need to be paying attention to the metrics that
Yeah.
you just mentioned, because that's how you build a truly scaled business, right?
Yeah, and I think you're building for the times when like you're not always going to have money flowing in.
Yeah.
So, you know, what we're looking at is that what if we never raise money again, or like what if suddenly one of the things I kept hearing from VCs in the US last year was that mental health actually never had a breakout from a VC perspective, right? And when you think of VCs wanting like a 5 to 7 year time horizon for an exit, it's very hard in mental health.
Yeah.
Even some of the companies that eventually went public have then gone bankrupt.
Yeah.
Some companies where VCs have wanted to exit have actually been sold for, literally 15 or 20 cents to the dollar kind of thing. So, yeah, money might not pour into mental health in the next 2 to 3 years. I mean, that is all. There is a probability attached to that. Although we are seeing some seed investments right now in the US starting to happen again. Um, but yeah, I think it's always important to uh, yeah, just keep that user in mind. And like I said, if we're able to get this funnel right,
Yeah.
and take it to the top quartile in the market, then we'll also be more confident about pumping in more money into marketing, and really scaling up, like some of the examples I gave you of Headspace and Flow and Duolingo.
Love it. I think, those are some really deep insights into the world of mental health and how you've built out Evolve. But I love ending our chats with, this question which Jeff Bezos uses a lot in his regret minimization framework, where basically he thinks about a lot of life decisions at the age of 80 and thinks back to the current present situations and makes them that way. So, what profound insights do you think you would have at the age of 80? If you were to distill it into one significant learning, one regret, and one pivotal life decision.
Looking ahead all the way to 80.
Yes, it's a heavy
Wow,
loaded question.
it is very heavy. Um, I'll tell you what I thought of like about 5 years back, right, when I wanted to be an entrepreneur. It was saying that, I mean, one of the quotes that I really loved was, the privilege of a lifetime is to discover who you truly are. Um, I think, yeah, looking back at at the age of 80, I would love to have made some progress in that direction towards like this journey of self discovery and really discovering, apart from what the world wants you to be, who you truly are. I think that's like this anyway, the self awareness and self discovery journey that I'm on. Um, for example, next weekend I'm actually going for a couple of days to these caves in the Himalayas to meditate, and a lot of this is like my own journey.
Yeah.
Startups will come and go, things like that will come and go. At a career level, I see this, as a chance to really make an impact on the world in different areas that I care about. And when starting Evolve, also I looked at it as saying that, what, I'm going to spend my career in different chunks of time where I'm going to try and solve problems that I care about. So mental health being the first one where I said, I'm going to devote the next 10 years of my life to Evolve. I mean, Evolve came into being, but to mental health, really try and make an impact, then move on to maybe something like climate tech or whatever the next industry will be. And yeah, looking ahead at 80, maybe I wish like, yeah, I could look back and be like, okay, I've actually just left the world in a slightly better place than I got it, and yeah, created a lot of value for others, created a lot of value for myself.
Yeah, and I can truly testify to that, right? I think you started this journey back in college itself. And I think entrepreneurship is the best way to discover yourself, very honestly, because that's your
Oh yeah,
best teacher in any way. But so would you say starting Evolve was the pivotal life decision in some sense?
I think the pivotal one was actually having the courage to pack my bags when I was at Shell. So when everything was going well,
Yeah.
um, it was like it was easy for me actually to. I mean, I think I had a job, like my next promotion was also secured within Shell. I had a job offer from another company as well in London. But just having that courage at the time to be like, I think there's something out there for me that's a lot more fulfilling than this, and yeah, just being able to take that decision. I think that was pivotal in itself, and yeah, ever since then, it's kind of been a very organic flow of events and things in my life that have just led me to this point.
Love it. Thanks for sharing all these deep insights, Anshul. I think audience will really benefit from learning more
I
about
hope
the
so.
mental health space.
I hope
Coming on
so.
to the last segment, rapid fire. Might know some of these things already, but we'll do it nevertheless. Are there any books, podcasts, or resources that have had a profound impact on your life or career?
Uh, yeah, I think, I mean, definitely, but if like just in the last 6 months, if I have to pick one, I think Man's Search for Meaning was a good book by Viktor Frankl. Um, yeah,
That is one book that had the most profound impact on me as well. I think I read it back in uni itself. One professional and one personal goal over the next year.
professional goal and personal goal. So I've recently got back into golf after almost 6 or 7 years. So, I mean, top of mind, my personal goal is to take down my golf handicap to a certain number.
Yeah.
And professionally with Evolve, I think one of the goals I'm very excited about chasing is to win the Global Apple Design Award next year.
Amazing. Which person has the most formative impact on your life?
So, wow, these are tough questions. um, yeah, so I mean, formative impact would obviously be, apart from parents, there was a neighbor growing up. I had this neighbor who happened to be a national level football player, and he was the football and hockey coach of like this school nearby, and they would always win these trophies. And he inculcated a lot of this concept of sport in my life. So ensuring that I would play things like football every day and get a coach's perspective to life in a true sense, right? Which is about like learning how to actually lose, learning how to have fights, rough it out a little bit. And I think that was a very interesting person who was around me at that time, which I feel looking back has shaped me and at least toughened me up a little bit, because growing up I was really really timid, and
being an athlete, I think in some sense makes you the most resilient.
Now what I've realized is that my entire life there's always been at least one sport that I'm actively playing, and that's been like a thread throughout, and I think that's going to be a thread that's going to continue for life.
Amazing. If you were to write a book about your life, what would the title be?
I really don't have a phrase for this.
What is Evolve's tagline?
I mean, we started with like a generic thing of like, create a better you or be your best self, things like that. But I really wouldn't call that the book title. No, I think I'm gonna have to skip this. I don't have a
sure.
specific answer in mind.
What are you most proud of?
Like I said, I think when I look back, that decision to leave a cushy life and like my comfort zone was something I am very proud of. And I think that's kind of given me the courage to just have that belief in myself that I can keep reinventing myself, or there's always going to be things out there, like to just trust the process, to to put yourself out there. You'll always attract people who believe in you, and I do know this, that even down the road there'll be multiple times in my life when I'm actually gonna reinvent myself and consciously leave my comfort zone.
And what's the kindest thing anyone's ever done for you?
The kindest thing.
This is the last one, I promise.
So, I mean, one of the stories I like to tell is actually I was doing a trek in Meghalaya, and it was like a 6-hour trek. We trekked down this mountain, we walked along this river bank. It was beautiful, and as we were coming back up, we were hungry, we were thirsty, we had run out of water, and we were passing this local village, and we casually knocked on someone's door and asked whether she could make us chai, and she did. So she invited us into her house, like a small house, and she made us chai, and so she gave us chai, and then she literally was profusely apologizing for the fact that she had run out of biscuits at home. And that was just so, it was just so touching.
Yeah.
It was not only a kind moment, but it was like one of those life lessons where, it's about just having a big heart, and like with a big heart, you can really, touch someone very deeply.
Yeah. What an amazing story of generosity, and such a beautiful note to end the episode with as well. Thank you, Anshul, for coming on the show. Loved having you on,
Thank you, Shrishti.
and loved reconnecting with you.
Yes.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you.